It was supposed to be just another weekend. My parents were away on a work trip, leaving me in charge of my little brother. We were used to it by now. I was old enough, and they trusted me. Our house was in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever really happened. Or so I thought. As the sun set and the shadows grew longer, the house began to feel different. What was usually a warm, inviting place now felt oddly quiet, almost too quiet. My brother was already in his room, playing games, completely unaware of the unsettling shift in the atmosphere. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the stillness of the night getting to me. But no matter how much I tried to relax, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I settled into the living room, trying to focus on a movie, but the silence was deafening. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed unusually loud, each second dragging on longer than the last. The house, usually filled with the comforting sounds of family, now felt like a stranger to me. It was just me and my brother, alone, in a house that suddenly didn't feel as safe as it always had. It was sometime after midnight when I first heard the noise. At first, it was just a faint sound, like footsteps, far off in the distance. I paused the movie, straining to listen, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a stray animal or the wind playing tricks. Still, the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. I tried to focus on the screen, but the tension in the air was palpable. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. Soft, deliberate footsteps, moving around the side of the house. My heart started to race. I muted the TV and sat there in silence, ears straining. There it was again, closer now, like someone was walking just outside the window. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just my imagination running wild. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow passing by the window, just a flicker, gone almost as soon as it appeared. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow had been too close, too human-like to be an animal. I got up, trying to stay calm, and walked through the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was locked, just as I had left it, but when I reached the back door, I found it slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it earlier. My pulse quickened as I closed it firmly, locking it again. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, as if eyes were on me, tracking my every move. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, and every creak and groan of the house was magnified by my mounting fear. I decided to check outside, thinking maybe a neighbor was causing the commotion. I crept to the window and peered out, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed a shadow moving slowly along the side of the house. I squinted, trying to make out the figure hidden in the darkness. It was a man, barely visible, but unmistakably there. He was lurking just out of sight, watching our every move through the windows. My blood ran cold. I knew then that this was no coincidence. Someone was stalking us. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my brother, who was still oblivious to the danger, and hurriedly led him to the basement. The basement was the only place I could think of where we might be safe. Once we were in the basement, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I could hear the footsteps now, heavy and deliberate, moving closer to the basement door. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the situation. The urgency in my tone was palpable, and I hoped the operator understood just how dire our situation was. As I waited for the police to arrive, the footsteps grew louder, the door handle rattling as someone tried to get in. Every sound seemed to echo in the cramped space, amplifying the fear I felt. My brother huddled close to me, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. We were trapped in the dark, listening to the intruder trying to break in, and all I could do was hope the police would get here in time. As I struggled to keep my composure, desperately trying to explain our situation to the 911 operator, the sound of the stalker trying to force open the basement door became almost unbearable. The door creaked and groaned under the pressure, the wood straining with every push. My heart raced, and my breathing quickened with every inch he managed to pry open. I could hear his heavy breathing through the door, each sound amplifying our fear. The seconds felt like hours. Every movement he made seemed to echo louder and louder, heightening the terror that gripped us. I glanced at my brother, trying to reassure him with a shaky smile, though I was terrified myself. I could only hope that the police would arrive before he managed to break through. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced through the night. The wail of police sirens grew louder, and the stalker hesitated, his movements becoming erratic. I could hear the commotion upstairs as the police entered the house. Their footsteps and shouts echoed down the stairs, and the noise from the stalker stopped abruptly. A few tense moments later, I heard the police officer's authoritative voice commanding the intruder to come out. The basement door was forced open, and the officers, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, quickly subdued the man. As the police led him away in handcuffs, my fear began to ebb, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. When I saw his face illuminated by the police lights, I was shocked. It was the eldest son of our neighbor, someone I had seen around but never suspected of anything sinister. The shock of the revelation hit me hard. Despite the relief of our rescue, the sense of betrayal and fear lingered, leaving us to grapple with the aftereffects of the terrifying ordeal. After the horrifying night, my family made the decision to move. We packed up and left as quickly as we could, searching for a place that felt safe, somewhere far from the shadows of our past. The trauma of that night left deep emotional scars. I found it hard to shake the constant fear that I was being watched or followed, even in the supposed safety of our new home. Despite the stalker being behind bars, the feeling of being observed lingered. I often caught myself glancing over my shoulder or double-checking locks, haunted by the thought that the threat might return. The story ends with me standing by the window of our new house, staring out into the darkness. The quiet outside feels different now, foreboding. The terror of that night has not entirely left me, and the uncertainty of whether the danger is truly gone keeps me on edge. Even with the stalker imprisoned and the house secured, the shadows of fear continue to loom over my thoughts, a reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be. The night was bitterly cold as I trudged home through the empty streets of my small Canadian town. Snow was falling heavily, blanketing everything in a thick layer of white that seemed to absorb all the sounds around me. The darkness was almost oppressive, making the street appear even more desolate and remote. Every step I took was accompanied by the crunch of snow beneath my boots, a stark and solitary sound in the eerie silence. I couldn't shake the sense of dread that seemed to cling to me, an unsettling chill that went beyond the cold. It felt as though something was lurking just beyond the veil of darkness, watching me from the shadows. As I neared a stretch of road lined with sparse trees, I noticed something darting rapidly in my peripheral vision, flitting between the shadows of the trees. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination or maybe a stray animal, something harmless that was merely skittering through the underbrush. But then, a foul odor began to creep into the air, a nauseating stench of decay and rot that seemed to emanate from the direction of the trees. The smell grew stronger with each step I took, and it began to gnaw at my senses, feeding my growing anxiety. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the mounting unease that the combination of sight and smell was causing. As I continued down the street, I began to feel an unsettling presence behind me. The sounds of movement in the shadows grew louder and faster, like something or someone was definitely pursuing me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat quickening with the rising terror. I dared a glance over my shoulder and was met with a sight that nearly froze me in place. Between the trees stood a grotesque figure, nearly 2 meters tall and emaciated. The creature's silhouette was thin and elongated, its form barely visible in the dim light. Suddenly, it let out a deafening, high-pitched scream that sliced through the night, sending a shiver down my spine and paralyzing me with sheer terror. For a moment, he was completely frozen, paralyzed by the horrifying sight and the ear-splitting scream of the creature. The sound seemed to echo relentlessly in his mind, magnifying his fear and making it almost unbearable. Summoning every ounce of courage he could muster, he broke free from his paralysis and sprinted through the snow-covered streets. His terror drove him forward, each step fueled by the desperate need to escape. As he fled, the snow crunched loudly beneath his feet, but he managed to outrun the terrifying presence that had pursued him. When I finally stumbled through my front door, I was shaking and breathless. The image of that grotesque figure and the scream that pierced the night was still hauntingly vivid in my mind. The experience left me deeply traumatized, and I couldn't shake the terror that clung to me. From that night on, I avoided that route completely. The memory of the creature and its bone-chilling scream continued to haunt me, leaving a lasting scar on my psyche. The fear of encountering it again lingers, a constant reminder of the horror that nearly claimed me. Even in the safety of my own home, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, dreading the possibility that the nightmare might return.